Hi guys, welcome back to Deep's PM Insight podcast. Today we're going to be talking about a topic that can actually make or break your project as a project manager. More often than not, most project managers actually miss out these things when creating a project budget. We'll be discussing the often overlooked aspect of creating a budget, such as management reserve, contingency reserve, and your cost baseline in itself. If you ever find yourself scrabbling around to get extra funds for your project, then this episode is for you. For the benefit of those new into project management, I will define what a project budget means. A project budget is basically a plan on how you intend to spend the money, for what and when you'll be spending that money. So in summary, it's the total projected cost that you need to actually complete a project over a period of time. But here's the thing, while most people focus on the obvious costs like maybe your labor cost, material cost of technology, and the other costs that might come to your mind, they often forget the crucial part of your project budget, which is the management and contingency reserve. Now, let me break it down for you. I'll start with the contingency costs. Contingency costs are the reserves or fund that you've set aside for identified risk. Basically, people call this the known or unknowns. These are risks that you're actually aware from the beginning of your project, but cannot fully predict the impact. In this case, they serve as a safety net for the known unknowns, which are like risks that you feel like you know, but cannot necessarily tell the impact in its entirety. Your contingency reserve basically helps absorb the cost without derailing your project. Let me paint an example. Imagine you're working on a tech project that involves buying infrastructure in USD, and at the time you created your project budget, dollar was say at the rate of 1,500. And then when you started your project, it became 2,000 naira at the time you needed to procure that particular item. What this does is your contingency cost allows you buffer that impact of increase in exchange rate at that particular point in time. Now imagine yourself as a project manager not considering contingency costs when creating the budget at first. I'm sure you'd have been going to management crying for more approval to get more money to actually cushion the effects of that risk of increase in exchange rates. Now, the next question can be, how do I calculate the contingency budget or a contingency reserve, right? Basically, what you need to do is first off, identify the total cost of your project, which is the cost of activities, materials, and whatnot. After identifying that, all you need to do is add 5% or 10% buffer, which will then determine your cost baseline at that point in time. So your cost baseline would be your work package cost plus your contingency cost, which is usually the 5% that I mentioned, 5 to 10% that I mentioned earlier, and that gives you your cost baseline for your project. The good part of it is that you don't require an approval to spend your contingency cost. As a project manager, you have the authority to actually spend your contingency cost based on the current state that you are in your project or if that risk actually happens. Now, let's move to the next one, which is the management reserve. Now, management reserve are actually a little bit different. These funds are set aside for truly unexpected risk, and they are typically called unknowns. These are the things that blindside you that as a project manager, you can't literally even think about such a thing happening. And an example might be maybe regulation change that impacts your project, or a client comes with a change request. Like, these are things that you can't really foresee as a project manager, which is why they are called unknown risk anyways. The management reserve can actually cover these high impact surprises without you having to beg for money or compromise the quality of your products. Basically, the management risk is like 5 to 10% of your cost baseline. Remember, cost baseline is your planned costs plus your contingency costs, right? So now management reserve would be 5 to 10% of your cost baseline. And here's the sad part. You require management's approval before you actually spend on the management reserve. Many new project managers either don't include this reserve or just underestimate them. A common mistake is trying to keep your budget tight to actually please stakeholders, and then after a while it backfires, and when unforeseen circumstances arise, you're unable to actually handle your project properly, hence leading to failure of your project. I'll be sharing best practices on how to properly plan your budget as a project manager. The first best practice is identify your known risk in your project. Properly identifying these risks that can impact your timeline, the scope of your project, and your costs would actually help you properly plan. Personally, what I typically do is I look at historical data or do research on how much that kind of project will typically cost, and I then allocate contingency reserve for each of those risk items that I've identified. After completing your cost estimates and you've added the contingency cost, which is usually 5 to 10% depending on your organization and you as a project manager, Then you add a management reserve to the cost baseline that you have. In this case, some people use 5%, some people use 10%, while some use between 5 to 10%. Again, this depends on the peculiarity of your organization and what you feel like is the best contingency or management risk for your organization. The next question can be, what if my organization doesn't approve this? Then the third step is what you need to do. You need to involve your stakeholders and get their buy-in as regards the need to actually have your contingency and management reserve. You can even go as far as showing them previous projects, historical data, basically stating that these are projects that you've done that actually exceeded the budget at the end of the day, and how including management and contingency reserve would actually help resolve cases where your projects are seen as overshooting budgets or maybe overrunning the required budgets. And in this case, they can say, your project was over budget the last time you managed it, whereas you didn't add the management and contingency cost. And the last part is ensure you monitor and track your budget closely. In a case where you need to increase your management and contingency reserve, then you need to actually be proactive about that as a project manager. I mean, we all know budget is usually not in its entirety static. If you're still here, then it means you actually stayed to listen to the podcast till this very minute. Thank you. Now I'm going to end it by saying the key takeaways from this is creating a successful budget isn't just about listing the obvious expenses. By accounting for both known and unknown risks through using contingency and management reserve, you are setting up yourself for success and avoiding those painful last-minute budget conversations that you have as a project manager. In this case, helping you deliver your projects on budgets because you've considered the known and unknown risks and added contingency and management reserve for that. I'd like to hear your comments about how you create your budget and how you've had to deal with convincing stakeholders for you to approve or for them to approve your management and contingency reserve. Please don't forget to share with someone that might need this because, again, you don't know who is actually struggling with managing their budgets within your network. Thank you for listening and see you next time.